Dr. Irfan, you are a teacher, you're a teacher educator, you're an academic and a researcher, and you're also a development professional and practitioner, including your current role as the technical director on the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa education sector program. It's great to sit down with you today and have a chat about education issues, big and also in the context that you're working at the moment. In your view, what are the biggest challenges that are facing education systems in contexts such as Pakhtunkhwa, where you're working?
There are many challenges, but I think one of the most important challenges is the out-of-school children, particularly in Pakistan. There are millions of those outside, and particularly girls. This, I think, is essentially a supply-side challenge, and addressing it will require establishing more schools, like I said, especially for girls.
I think an important point here as well is the challenges of COVID and what's been faced by education systems in every country across the world. Over 1 billion children affected by school closures in the last 18 months or so. So do you think that COVID has fundamentally changed how we need to think about the delivery of education in contexts such as Pakistan?
Absolutely, undoubtedly. Firstly, I just mentioned the challenge of out-of-school children. I think it has been magnified due to COVID. Some of the recent data that we've been looking at shows that the number of out-of-school children may have doubled in some areas. This is not surprising to us. We were expecting it to happen due to the economic shocks because of pandemic. So we have more children out of school because of COVID now as we speak. Then even talking about those children who have been attending the school, there have been frequent school closures, as we all know. And that in and of itself has led to learning losses. I mean, the schools have not been able to cover the curriculum for the various grade levels. And so therefore, that's another challenge that we have to confront. One more thing which I would like to mention is the unevenness in access to digital media and technologies in Pakistan and in many other developing countries as well. For instance, the kids going to schools in affluent areas, and especially the private schools, they remained largely connected with their schools through such technologies as the one that we're using right now. However, we do know that a great majority of children in Pakistan, particularly in KP, do not have these technologies. And so therefore, when the schools were closed, the children were completely cut off from the schools. We did try and innovate and send, for example, the worksheets to school to children at home so that they can work with them in their homes. But this is insufficient.
I think you've outlined that incredibly well, and the huge challenges that the system's going to face, and the fact that it will take a long time and it will take a great deal of resource for children to catch up and for systems to catch up. I wanted to focus on something a little bit more positive, perhaps. You yourself work very closely in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with the Department of Education there in their reform efforts. It's a challenging place in terms of its topography, its geography, its recent fragility as well. But yet we have seen real progress in student learning and other key indicators across the province. So I wanted to ask what you think are the key factors, what are the determining factors that have made that success happen?
The government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa recognized the value of systemic reforms. And by that, I mean not working piecemeal on different components of the education system, but working simultaneously on multiple fronts So let me just give you the example of the quality reforms that have been undertaken in the province. So that involve three components of the education system: the teachers in teaching, assessments, and the learning materials. So first of all, merit-based recruitment. So the teachers in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are being recruited now for the last 4, even more years now, through a merit-based recruitment system that involves, written tests and also looking at their qualifications and so on. But it does not involve any, so-called political influence and those kind of things. In addition to that, once the teachers are recruited, they undergo a very rigorous and comprehensive 9-month-long induction training. And then once they are done with the induction training, all teachers have to participate in a continuous professional development program. And here I would like to focus on the systemic nature of reforms. So the assessment systems which have been created in the KP are intertwined with the continuous professional development program. So the contents of the training are informed by the results of the assessment, and that's been happening for the last 4 years or so. And because of that, we see improvement in the learning outcomes. And KP also invested in improving the quality of the textbooks, as well as provided the teachers with scripted lesson plans that they've been using in their classroom. So all of these things combined did contribute to an improvement in learning outcomes in KP.
Really like your point here about how systemic it is and how important it is for all of these things to be happening together to improve the learning outcomes. And yet, I would challenge you on one point here that the indicators for girls are still lagging behind those for boys. If we look at enrollment, if we look at attendance and learning as well. So is there more that we could be doing for girls?
As far as the learning gaps are concerned, we have seen improvement, and we have seen the gaps close between the girls and the boys, especially in those districts which have been implementing the CPD, the Continuing Professional Development Program, for the last 2 years or so. Now, yes, I agree that there have been persistent gaps between the girls and the boys in enrollment. We need to address that, and the way to address that is by supplying more schools. The data tells us that when the schools are available close to the places where the girls live, that they do attend the school. So there is no demand side issue. It's really a supply side issue. We provide them with more school spaces and would see that the girls' enrollment in schools will improve. I should also say that in future, I mentioned that there is a gap in access to digital technologies. When we do invest in access to digital technologies, I would suggest that we should prioritize girls when we do that, because that would also address these persistent inequities in learning outcomes and in other areas of education outcomes.
And on that point, Irfan, of investment in digital technologies, this week is the Global Partnership for Education Financing Summit in London with education policymakers, politicians, all sorts of decision makers from multilaterals as well. Do you have any messages for them as they meet for what their priorities or investment should be within education?
Yes, I can think of 3 messages to give to the global education community. The first is support the governments to close the digital gap. That's absolutely important. We do know that the digital gap will express itself in terms of learning gaps. So I think it'd be great to help close the digital gap. The second thing that I would like to say is there are no interventions to support parents to help their children. So the global community should invest in the innovations that help parents engage with their children at homes. I think that's absolutely important. And lastly, when the children get back to the schools after pandemic, governments should be supported to conduct diagnostic assessments of learning losses and then devise targeted strategies to support teachers, help them with remedials to help children get over those losses.
Thanks, Irfan. It's been really fascinating to hear your views on what needs to change, as well as on some of the progress that's been made in Pakistan to date. So just remains me to say thank you very much for your time.
Not a problem. Thank you, Adam.